Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. In May 2020, disturbing news started trickling in. Defense Ministry sources indicated that on the night of May 5th and May 6th, two separate incidents had occurred at the Indo-China border, one at Pangong Tso Lake and the other at Naku, Sikkim. The incident had resulted in injuries to several soldiers on both sides. More bad news came in after that. It seems like in the month prior to May, China had clearly amassed a large number of troops and armaments at the LAC in eastern Ladakh and other areas along the LAC. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worse in June when, on the 15th of June 2020, 20 Indian soldiers were killed and there were an unknown number of Chinese casualties at Galwan. What led to this tragic face-off? What is the situation as it stands now? And what are the realities that India may face or has to face against China? Joining me to talk about that are two defense experts, Lieutenant General Panag, Defense and Strategic Affairs expert and former Lieutenant General in the Indian Army, and Sushant Singh, Senior Fellow at CPR India and defense writer. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining in. Lieutenant General Panag, let me start with you because I think what's also happened in the course of the year is the lack of clarity, which was, highly unavailable at that point and even now. So I just want to go back in time to that period in May and ask you to walk us through what exactly happened in that duration.
See, as far as what has appeared in the media, sometimes around the middle of May last year, reports started coming in of clashes between the troops at various points. But I think this was what was coming out in the media. But what actually has happened, as other bits of information that have emerged later, is that beginning April, the PLA, straight from its exercises, had started moving forward. And in early May, it came and secured the unheld areas, preempted us and secured the unheld areas at 3-4 locations. Most notable, which was in the news, was the north of Pangong Tso, the area between Finger 4 and Finger 8. They secured it. They came up to Finger 4, in fact, were overlooking Finger 3. Then in Gogra and Hot Springs, they ingressed in both the areas, and particularly in Gogra, in the Kugrang River area. Why they did that we can come back to later. Then in the Galwan River Valley, they came in and ingressed about a kilometer or so, not more than that. And lastly, in the Depsang Plains, they were obstructing our patrols at the crossroads for the last couple of years, but our patrols had been going forward up to patrolling points 10 to 13, and now they firmly stopped us from going forward in the area of crossroads. That's from where the 1959 claim line passes. Now, what is the ground situation in relation to this? I mean, how would it look on the ground? See, the 1959 claim line, which is actually originally 1956 claim line, which they modified slightly to make it 1959 claim line. And though officially it was, during talks held in 1960 that it came out, it's a cartographic marvel. Right at that time, they did phenomenal terrain evaluation and selected those areas wherein the security of Aksai Chin was ensured. And in case we ever went up to those areas in strength by developing our infrastructure, which was nowhere there in 1959, then they'll be able to take away large chunks of our territory. In Ladakh, the main defenses are almost anything from 10 to 100 kilometers from the LAC. And so the main defenses are manned. You cannot man everywhere. It's like the fingers of the hand. You start manning these, you will require that. Then resources, you man the fist. So we were manning the fist And this area was kept under surveillance and patrolling. Now, what the Chinese did was they moved up to their 1959 claim line. And in fact, in Gogra and Hot Springs, they crossed the 1959 claim line. We were caught napping. We were surprised at the tactical level and at the strategic level. And the rest of the information put out by the government and by the army was actually just to substantiate its denial and obfuscation, as if nothing much has happened. And this is, and then the theory about differing perceptions of the LAC and the 1959 claim line, started doing the rounds. And this was the situation that remained up to 20th of June. Then, like they say in habeas corpus petitions, where is the body? Find the body. So bodies don't lie. And when the first clash took place, and in the Galwan River Valley on the 15th and 16th of June, and we lost 22 soldiers, including the commanding officer of 16 Bihar. I think that is when the first time the balloon burst. Though on 28th of May, I wrote a detailed article. Ajay Shukla had written on 24th of May, and Sushant also had covered it in the Indian Express around about the same time, that this seems to have happened. And we had all said that the Chinese this time have not come for merely a routine border, creating a routine border incident to embarrass us. They have come in strength, and their idea is to come up to their 59 claim line. And the immediate strategic aim being to prevent the development of our infrastructure that may threaten the Aksai Chin and other usurped areas in due course. Right. So this is what transpired up to June. I'll just sum up in one more point. And this tussle carried on. Then this talks about disengagement and all, and Chinese sort of gave lip service to it, went back a little, but remained there. But the intrusions in Depsang, in Gogra Hot Springs, and in north of Pangong Tso remained. Galwan River Valley was largely resolved because it was only a matter of perception of from where the line, actual 59 claim line, went. So after the incident got resolved, I mean, both sides moved back. Then on 29th and 30th August, when we did the operation, went and seized the Kailash Range, and we occupied a dominating kind of a position, which is in our own area, and we did not cross. And therein lay a major disadvantage, because top of the Kailash Range is a plateau, which is 1 to 2 kilometers wide. And we are sitting on the crest, and there's little space on our side. So what the PLA did was they came and sat opposite us. But a situation, very volatile situation, emerged on top with tanks facing face to face, and in the situation in the area of Reshinla, and troops in area of Mukpari and Rizangla, etc. And then, of course, the foreign ministers and all met, and talks began in right earnest. And then on 10th of February, we went in for a kind of a mutual withdrawal, from the area north of Pangong Tso. Most of us at that time also highlighted that unless it is all encompassing agreement, it's a big disadvantage. But like I have written, that it is, the Chinese were in a position of phenomenal advantage in DBO sector and in Gogra Hot Springs, where they could have, in any event of escalation, they could have usurped large amounts of our territory, because these are militarily untenable positions. We can't defend them. They will be lost in event of a war. So now, this is what the situation is. We have got a standalone agreement for north of Pangong Tso, but the major intrusion and the most dangerous intrusion in the area of Depsang Plains and this area remains.
Thank you for explaining that in so much detail. Sushant, let me turn to you. One big what has been answered by General Panag in terms of what exactly happened. I think the other big what that people were questioning at that point was, what was the immediate catalyst? And secondly, did this look like it was coming? Did it look like this was something that China had on its mind in terms of intent, and it was only a matter of this actually, being actioned out?
Thank you, Mitali. But see, there are a couple of things here. Number one, we are all talking in hindsight, and it's very fine to be wise in hindsight and say that all of us saw this coming, but perhaps not. But there were a couple of signals, and let me indicate them. And those signals were clearly missed. One was the fact that there were clashes happening in Pangong Lake area, north bank of Pangong, and within Pangong, even as late as October 2019. And this is, if you remember, just after the 5th August 2019, when India had made Ladakh a separate union territory, removed Article 370. China had strongly objected to it, both in the United Nations as well as in Beijing. It had raised those statements, and the Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, had to do an emergency visit, a flying trip to China to convince them that things were not as bad as they made it to look out, as they were made to look out. Secondly, post Doklam, that is the 2017 standoff on the Bhutanese territory, where the Indian soldiers had gone and stopped the Chinese, and the 73-day-long standoff had continued. Since then, within the Chinese media and in the Chinese establishment, there had been a lot of conversation that the Indian side had been acting very aggressively, has been behaving in a manner almost at the behest of the US. And they almost wanted to teach India a lesson in that sense. So that is the second indicator, which was in a sense missed at a higher level. At a lower level, the frequency of the clashes and the fact that the Chinese troops could very easily come in from the exercise areas into these areas of Pangong, Galwan, Hot Springs, Kogra, Depsang, Demchok, and do these activities while Indians continued to believe that things were not that serious. I remember the Army Chief General Narwane saying this in middle of May, 15th May, that things are not that serious. This is usual stuff. It would be resolved. And clearly that was not so. Later on, as has been reported by me then and by others, there were intelligence warnings that the Chinese were coming in, and those intelligence warnings were missed to a degree, which allowed the Chinese to come in. Having said that, what were the reasons why Chinese did it? As General Panag said, to improve their defensive, to improve their posture in these areas where they can do and perform better, to come up to the 1959 line. Secondly, most of us believe it is also to send a message to India, the way India has been aligning with the US, and they want to send a message to India at that level. Thirdly, probably the way India bifurcated the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir into two Indian territories. The Chinese have clearly been very angry about it, and that is something that has been indicated by them. And I think that was another reason why it was done. Other than that, what the Indian establishment has said at various forums, whether it is the Indian Air Force chief or the Foreign Secretary and others, they say that Indians were making a lot of infrastructure, and the Chinese were worried about it. They wanted us to stop making that infrastructure. That is why they came in. The Indian Air Force chief, is on record saying that Chinese were trying to perhaps practice their deployments and the new forms of employment since they have reorganized themselves. That could be another reason. But I think primarily the first three reasons, what General Panag highlighted, that the fact that they wanted to come up to the 1959 line and take advantage of the terrain in case of a future development, the fact that it was linked to Kashmir. It was linked to the bifurcation of Kashmir and the removal of Article 370. And the third fact, the perception that India was getting too close to the US. And that's why it was behaving in the manner that it was behaving. I think those seem to be the primary reasons why the Chinese forces behaved in Ladakh and continue to behave in the manner that they have behaved since.
I think the continue to behave is the worrying part, Lieutenant General Panag. And, these are two big blocks, but let me ask you to gauge the responses in terms of what you think the political and the military response was, and whether you think that has moved adequately since this event in May up to where we stand 1 year later.
Yeah, I think once the Indian political establishment and the army and the armed forces realized what has happened, then particularly after 15th of June, 16th of June incident, then we mobilized in a massive manner. Now, we decided not to confront the Chinese directly or create a situation which will lead to escalation. We just deployed ourselves, and so that no further ingress takes place, in the areas where they've already ingressed. And we put bulk of our forces, our reserves, almost a force of a corps worth, about 2 divisions, focused in the Chishul area and the Indus Valley for a counteroffensive in case the Chinese escalate. So we decided deliberately not to get into to escalate and get into a limited war kind of a situation. Now, this was our. Now, the Chinese had also a similar aim. They didn't want a war. They had preempted us, surprised us, created a situation. They thought that we would escalate, and then, if required, then they would appropriately punish us, particularly in the areas where they have an advantage. So this is how I think our government's decision was wise. Though there's a lot of criticism, people say, why didn't we, aggressively evict Chinese? We should have risked the war. No. As I explained in the very beginning, the situation on the ground is such that the entire DBO sector is militarily untenable. We just cannot hold on to it. In event of any escalation anywhere, the entire sector will go. And north of Galwan River Valley, the entire sector will go, and China will be leaning on to the Nubra River and probably getting into a collusion with the Pakistanis. And this is from the military point of view. Similar situation prevails in the Hot Springs Gogra area, because our 100-kilometer long line of communication can be cut off at Marsimikla Pass, it can be cut off at Shogsalu, and it could also have been cut off at Phobrang, from where the route goes to the north of Pangong Tso. So this position is also militarily untenable. While, however, the Chinese didn't want to escalate even after all this that happened, because as a big power, any setback or even a stalemate is defeat for it. Now, India didn't want to escalate because there is a differential in our CNP and particularly in the military component. So and then there's the apprehension a major setback would be politically catastrophic for a government in India. So we decided that cut our losses, accept what has happened for the moment, let China not have its way, which is exactly what we achieved. So theoretically, since neither side escalated, we actually stalemated China from achieving its overall aim, which was to, apart what Sushant had mentioned, that to impose its hegemony over India, where we were coming into conflict with them internationally and in the region. They wanted to impose their hegemony on India. No, we did not submit to that. So to that extent, it remained a stalemate. And stalemate is defeat for China. That is why at that stage, so I think the government has done well. And even when there's criticism of us withdrawing from Kailash Range, I have explained it twice earlier, that since DBO is untenable, a vast sector, since Gogra Hot Spring area is militarily untenable, if a threat posed by China probably forced us to go in for a standalone agreement. And this is where it shall remain. And I do not think the Chinese will now escalate, and neither does India want to escalate. So this kind of a fait accompli kind of a situation how this conflict will eventually end. Because Sundrangshu took, final, it lasted 1 year, and thereafter, even a few more years before the final disengagement, took place. I think slowly and gradually, this will just, it'll go out of public mind, and this is how the situation will remain, because government has very categorically said some of these are legacy issues and nothing has been lost, etc., etc. Yes, in the Gogra area where Chinese have crossed the 59 claim line, we may be able to negotiate with them to go back to their side. And we will promise that we will not construct any infrastructure. So a large buffer zone in Kugrang River, a large buffer zone in Depsang Plains. The buffer zone between finger 4 and 8 has already happened.
Sushant, you have a slightly different point of view, I think, because you wrote the disengagement deal on the two banks of Pangong is a fair deal for India when seen from the limited prism of these areas. But when considered from the perspective of the whole LAC in Ladakh, it raises questions about wisdom of giving up the only leverage India had for the sake of disengagement at North Bank. Do you agree with General Panag's point of view that this was possibly the only or the best solution available, or do you think we lost some leverage at this point?
I think, actually I'm in agreement with General Panag, because General Panag has also said the same thing, that we should have negotiated better. And we should have we should have dealt with the whole thing in a manner, because the Chinese were very keen that the disengagement takes place on the southern bank of Pangong, so that is the Kailash Range. And if they were very keen, and we knew that this is the only card we had with us, we should have played that card better and forced the Chinese to at least get out of Depsang or DBO sector, as General Panag said, which is strategically the most important area for us. We have exchanged it for northern bank of Pangong Tso, which is not really strategically that important. Of course, it is a piece of territory, it is a piece of land. Where I don't know if you remember, there's a Hindi film called Three Idiots. The climax of that film was shot there on the north bank of Pangong Lake. It's a famous tourist spot. But other than that, militarily, it is not as strategically important as DBO Depsang is. And because DBO and Depsang has been used so often, Mitali, let me explain to you in quickly why DBO and Depsang is so important and why each one of us keeps on emphasizing it. So, firstly, DBO Depsang is the only area in the whole of Indian mainland where China and Pakistan can physically collude. There's no other area in the mainland where China and Pakistan can physically collude. And as Gen Panag explained, DBO from our side is militarily untenable to defend if the Chinese try to come in. And if they try to come in, and if they keep on moving inside, they can actually cut off our communication lines, our support roads, support infrastructure, the roads that support southern Siachen Glacier, which can then allow Pakistan to come in and take Siachen. That is why DBO Depsang remains extremely important to us, and we cannot afford to lose that. That is something where the Chinese still continue to stop our patrols, still are not allowing us to reach the areas where we were reaching earlier. And that is why I believe that forsaking or exchanging our advantage on the Kailash Range with only the north bank of Pangong was not the wisest option. It was primarily done with a political aim to show that the problem has been solved, because we have constantly seen news reports attributed to sources which say, oh, all others are legacy issues. In fact, every single thing is a legacy issue in Ladakh. Ladakh issues go back to 1950s. Pangong Lake, 25% of all the Chinese incursions in last 5 years have taken place in Pangong. So Pangong is as much a legacy issue as Depsang or Demchok or any other area. But what clearly seems to be the political motive here is to give some kind of closure and say, okay, we have resolved this issue, this is done, let's not talk about it. As General Panag said, make it a fait accompli and say, oh, others are legacy issues, we'll talk about them, we'll deal with them later. Militarily, I understand why military was keen that these tanks facing each other in the Kailash Range area, southern bank of Pangong, were too dangerous. Even a minor incident, a minor accident could have led to escalation and could have led to a much bigger crisis. Therefore, disengagement was in need of the hour. But the fact that this disengagement did not lead to an overall disengagement on the whole of line of actual control, and particularly in the areas which were most important to us, I still think we fell short in what we achieved in Ladakh during the negotiations.
Mitali, may I add something to it?
Please go ahead.
This issue of the Kailash Range is a little overplayed. Why I say this is, I have walked on the Kailash Range, right from Reshinla all the way to Gurung Hill and, closer to Blacktop up to where the LAC is. And 2-3 times. And see, had we gone across the Kailash Range and gone onto the lower eastern slopes, then it was a major advantage that then you were into the Spangur Bowl and on the way to Rudok. A lot of people have talked about the the Chinese garrison at with a small Maldo. It's a meeting place. It's not a garrison. Their garrison is about 30 kilometers behind, and then even further behind at Shandong and at Rudok. They have no garrison there. So because we did not want to cross the LAC, we did not go to the eastern slopes. Then we left Blacktop on top of Gurung Hill, which is the reason why we had a debacle there in 1962, because we had failed to at that time also preemptively capture Blacktop. So the advantage was, and the Chinese were now sitting on top of Kailash Range opposite us. We could not launch a major offensive. Even if we wanted to launch an offensive, it would have had to be in the Indus Valley or in the Chumar sector. We couldn't have launched an offensive from Kailash Range. So to that end, even Kailash Range importance is little overplayed, and the looming threat at Depsang and at Gogra Hot Springs, where we would have lost large chunks of territory, I think made us compromise on this issue. And in my view, it's a fair one. It's a fair one. We had no option, and that is because of the original preemption. Had we prevented the original preemption by taking action, at no place did the Chinese come in where we had troops. Had we entered the area of patrolling point 10, 11, 12, 13 in preemptively before the Chinese, they would have never come there. Same situation was in the area of Gogra and Hot Springs. Had we had troops in strength, Chinese would have never come in. Since we were surprised preemptively, so consequently, this is how it is. And that threat made us compromise here. And in my view, this is how it will remain.
Let me actually then jump to the here and now, Lieutenant Gen Panag, because there are reports, including in India today or yesterday, I think, where they say China has quietly hardened its positions in eastern Ladakh. Far from winding down winter deployments, the Chinese army has reinforced its presence in eastern Ladakh depth areas with permanent accommodations and depots, an aggressive stance amidst continuing talks. Can we take it for granted, sir, that the fait accompli will remain, or is there the risk that we are caught napping again?
I think this is the reason is like this, that earlier most of the troops that came to this area, even in 1962 and even now, they come all the way from Xinjiang. Contrary to people saying they have better communications, or it is Xinjiang from here is 1,000 kilometers. They come from 1,000 kilometers all the way from there, from Xinjiang. And they had no infrastructure on the ground in these areas. And I'm talking of the areas of Rudok and even in closer to us. Yes, in DBO sector, they are a little closer. The distance to their GH219, that's the Xinjiang Tibet highway, is about 4 hours drive, but the troops are still in Xinjiang. So because the troops had to move such a long distances, so this time now they have started creating infrastructure which is closer by. And the reason for that is because we have raised the strength of the troops which are there to 3 times what they were earlier. Of course, part of it is because of the looming threat, but the Chinese also perceive the similar threat, that because we've got 3 divisions, and if they go back all the way to Xinjiang to their permanent locations, then India can repeat what China has done, particularly in the specific areas that are under discussion. So at the moment, both sides are suspicious of each other, but the PLA has created adequate infrastructure so that their response time is faster. In May last year, they had to do the pretense of exercises and then come forward. Now they can come straight from the garrisons that they are creating closer to the LAC. And similarly, in the period of last 1 year, we have also improved our infrastructure, not so much the one that for the offensive operations that for the reason for which China came in, but behind, our roads have come up, our accommodations have come up. So we are also capable of deploying equal number of troops as the Chinese.
Sushant, completely running out of time, but a quick final word from you on whether you think the events since May last year have created a permanent reset in the LAC, and whether you think India must now deal with the reality of two active borders.
Yes, very clearly. The fact is that the LAC, in some sense, the status quo ante has not been restored. A new status quo has been created. The fact that we have agreed to that on Pangong Tso and in Kailash Ranges, the fact that the Chinese continue to remain, as Gen Panag said, in Depsang, in Demchok, in Gogra and Hot Springs, that means the LAC has not returned to the original. The fact that we do not have the kind of resources we require to evict the Chinese or to restore the status quo as of April or May 2020. That clearly points to the fact that we can only hold the line in that sense. Whatever the new line is, we cannot change it. And it is also well known that the Indians have moved certain troops out of away from Pakistan border and onto the China border. And the fact that this two-front collusive threat is a challenge led to the back-channel negotiations between India and Pakistan, which has been reported in many papers and tacitly acknowledged by the UAE as well. So I think, yes, in a broad sense, you are absolutely right that the nature of the LAC has changed to some degree, and the fact that Indians have been forced to deal with a two-front collusive threat, which has led to this back-channel negotiations with Pakistan.
Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time today. Of course, broader questions remain about the economic repercussions of this face-off that we've been dealing with for a year, but I greatly appreciate your time and insight. Thank you for joining us.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.